Welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. I'm your host, Sam Kabert. I started this pod back in 2019 when I was taking my first steps on the path of remembering. And at the time, the tagline for the show was a journey of self-discovery. A year later, it became a journey of remembering. Yet, what I know now is back then, I was still seeking. And what I've come to know now is that it's the journey of seeking that brings us the silent, slow stillness of acceptance. And therein lies our own innate wisdom. It's my mission now to eradicate the glorification of hustle culture, as it was my drive in entrepreneurship that led to a greater whole, and that's because I was outsourcing my sovereignty rather than looking within. So let this be your invitation to take a deep breath in and remember that at any time we can shift our thoughts and our feelings to create the outer world in which we wish to live. Soul Seekers, it's time to grow. Let's go. What up, fam, and welcome back to another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. I am your host, Sam Kabert, as always, and this episode is so exciting. Like, honestly, straight up, this is one of my most favorite and memorable conversations I've had on a podcast. And I've been podcasting for this point. Let me do some quick math. 8 years. I've had probably 5-6 shows and probably interviewed near 1,000 people. If I'm being honest, I would say closer to 900. Probably. I haven't done all the math to really add them up, but since 2019, the only podcast I've been running is Soul Seeker. I sunsetted or retired the rest of those podcasts. But the reason why this one was so exciting was because I talked to someone named Mike Pawlawski. I feel like I am Ron Burgundy, and that's fair to say, make that kind of tongue-in-cheek joke, because Mike actually is a broadcaster, even though Ron Burgundy was an anchor news reporter. I digress. So why was this such a great conversation? Well, it wasn't because Mike is a professional world champion football player. It wasn't because he is one of, if not the most winningest quarterbacks in Cal Berkeley's history. It's not because he's coached and trained Jared Goff, who was a #1 overall pick in the NFL draft. It's none of those reasons. It's because Mike is such an incredible leader, an incredible person that has overcome so much adversity. You're going to hear in this episode how he was adopted at 2 weeks old, how he had a rare lung condition that made it so difficult for him to breathe that it literally felt like his lungs were burning, they were on fire, and his father and his mother pushed him to go deeper, and how that mindset led to him becoming such a successful athlete. Now, all of that's great. All of that is absolutely incredible. But what does that have to do with a show called Soul Seeker, where I talk about mental and emotional health and spiritual journeys and regulating the nervous system? Well, what's so fascinating about Mike's work is he perfectly embodies my philosophy of soul life balance. And soul life balance is really recategorizing mental and emotional health first and foremost, while still being grounded and disciplined in the human experience. In this episode, you're going to talk about how Mike really built this importance of learning to understand his nervous system from, dare I say, 6 years old. Maybe he didn't have the languaging, maybe he didn't have the intention around it, but he definitely had the intuition around connecting with his breath, regulating his nervous system, and developing what he calls an everyday great mindset. So you're going to hear about all of that and more. This is a very inspiring story and podcast. Mike shares some things that he has never shared before. And this is from someone who is a professional keynote speaker, a professional broadcaster, a best-selling author, and more. So buckle up. This is a great episode. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you have someone in your life that could benefit from men's work, send this episode to them, because really what we're diving into is men's work and how it's a superpower to be vulnerable. And it's just so inspiring to hear how he's working with these athletes, especially gladiators, right? Football players, gladiators that are willing to take down the mask and be vulnerable with one another. So if all of that resonates with you and you would like a community where you could be a little bit more vulnerable and get in touch with your nervous system so that you can find clarity, confidence, and more energy than ever before, I invite you to join my free Breath Club. Yes, I said free. So what's the Breath Club? This is our weekly breathwork session held on Zoom, where I'm leading you through a 30-minute breathwork practice. There's also an online community for daily support as well. If that's of interest to you, I invite you to join the Breath Club. You can do so by checking out the show notes, which, by the way, all of the links to Mike's website, his podcast, and everything else is in the show notes as well. So thank you so much. Enjoy this episode with Mike Pawlawski. All right, here we are again for another episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. I am so stoked to dive into Mike Pawlawski's story today. But before we do, as we always do in this podcast, we will ground with just a few simple breaths. So if you're doing anything where you can't close your eyes, you can always breathe with us, especially these grounding breaths, but just be mindful of your environment. And if you can't close your eyes, don't. But Mike, for you, for me, and for all of you that are in a position where you can just begin to slow down, I invite you to find a comfortable seat, closing down the eyes, sitting straight up, and finding an inhale through the nose all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, and sighing it out. Another big inhale through the nose all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, and sighing it out. One last one, big inhale, biggest one yet, all the way up, sipping in a bit more air at the top, holding the breath, just gently rolling up the eyes, and sighing it out. Letting the breath return to its natural state and rhythm, flickering the eyes open. Now we're ready to get this party started. Sweet. Mike, welcome to the Soul Seeker podcast. I'm so stoked to have you here. Let's jump straight into it. So you're the most winningest professional football player in California. Is that right?
No, so I'm winningest quarterback in Cal history, University of California, Berkeley.
Oh, got it. Okay,
yeah. In modern history, I should say, because there were some teams back in the 50s and 20s that were really good. But from the last 30 to 40 years, I have the highest winning percentage of being the quarterbacks of the guys that came through. And there's some dudes that I love, but that includes Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff. So, we won a lot of games when I was there.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then you won a world championship in the Arena Football League as well, right?
Yeah, I did. Albany Firebirds, fantastic football team. Had a great coach by the name of Mike Daly, who believed that high character was a big thing. We made a deal together that if we built a high character team, I'd win them a championship. And we did it. And that team went on to not just win that championship, but get voted the greatest team in the history of arena football.
Wow, yeah. That's amazing. Well, I bring all that up to say, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about trauma. We're going to be talking about resilience. We're going to be talking about the nervous system, all of these sorts of things. And I mean, I love to just highlight people's different backgrounds, especially ones that are getting into this work. You obviously have written your book that came out, I believe, in 2024, Everyday Great. You have an upcoming book all about PTSD. You're working with someone who trains everyone else in EMDR, like incredible things. Could you just give us a little bit of your backstory, like growing up, what it looked like for you? You were telling me a little bit before you hit record, but feel free to give us the whole, take as long as you need. We're here for it.
I appreciate that, brother. First off, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I know, when you run a podcast, your audience really, really matters. And so I listen to your podcast. I appreciate how much you care about your audience and what you bring to them. So I want to kind of bring my A game for you here today. I grew up in Southern California. I had the most incredible parents of all time, Gary and Chris Pawlawski. They were phenomenal. But early on, I was adopted right out the chute. And I say that now, and I never talked about this. This is literally the first time I'm speaking about this in a real public format, because this year I found out some interesting news about having a brother and sister that I didn't know about prior to this year. But as that kid, I was born with pneumonia, that little infant, the tiny little one. And I couldn't breathe. And I was for the first 2 weeks of my life, in foster care. And so they were feeding me something also where I couldn't eat. So I couldn't breathe, couldn't eat, wasn't sleeping. Obviously, at that age, for an infant, newborn, where you already have no control, that completely takes away control, makes you feel miserable. It's big T trauma, right? For a new being that small. I got with my parents. God placed me with my parents, and it was meant to be. My mom and dad were the most incredible parents of all time. And the fact is that they weren't able to have their own children. And so God figured out how to get them children, because they needed to be parents, and they were incredible. And I'm thankful every day for them. But I also had the thing that would cause my pneumonia. I had cystic fibrosis. And so as a result, I had severe lung disease. And every fall, my lungs would fill with fluid, and I would get sick as a dog, and I would end up in the emergency room with pneumonia or the croup or some kind of seriously life-threatening illness. And on 3 different occasions, the doctors actually told my parents, if he makes it through the night, he'll probably be okay. And so it was literally dire. Again, big T trauma stuff, right? So all those things that you face, where at that age, again, no control, that loss of control is what puts us into dorsal vagal shutdown. We'll get into all that later, but it's that trauma that hits the setting button in your nervous system. And so at 6 years old, and I talk about this when I speak publicly to groups, my parents asked the doctor, like, what can we do to help him get over this disease? How can we keep him out of the hospital? Because obviously this was trauma for them too, right? Watching your child suffer, not being able to help them. It's such a helpless feeling. And the doctor gave him some interesting news. He said, might try throwing him in sports, it might strengthen his lungs. Now, my dad grew up playing sports. He was football, baseball, basketball, whatever he could do. He was playing sports. He was a track guy. My mom grew up in post-war Germany. So she had some of her own stuff that she brought with her, right? But she was the ultimate mama bear. She just loved and cared about both me and my brother Eric so much that she grew up playing soccer a little bit. And she's like, yes, that is it. It gives us hope. It's an opportunity. We're going to do this. And so they put me in everything from baseball, basketball, soccer, swimming, tennis, track, like you name it. And they had me doing these sports. And I can literally remember how hard it was to breathe the first times. My lungs would burn. And I couldn't understand why it was so much harder for me to condition than it was for the other kids. Now, they hadn't diagnosed the cystic fibrosis. I was just getting sick every year. It goes on to, at the age of 15, I learned that I never have to get back in the hospital room for pneumonia again. I've trained, I've learned, I've developed my nervous system, I've developed my cardiovascular system, my pulmonary system, to the point now where I've literally beaten what would later get diagnosed as cystic fibrosis. And then that passion and understanding, not literally understanding, but knowing that that's what beat my lung disease, it became a drive for me every day to find a way to get better, to improve, to create optimal performance at all times. That became a real driving force for me. And so I did that, went on to play professional sports. You talked about a little bit. I get my college scholarship to Cal, and I knew for a fact that I was not good enough to play there when I showed up, right? Incredible imposter syndrome. And then I grew there. I learned the stresses enhancing mindset. And then I all of a sudden realized that I could play college football. And not only could I play college football, I played at a high level. And I ended up going on to become the Pac-10 Offensive Player of the Year, right, at Cal. We win 10 games. We're number 7 in the country. We beat Clemson in the Citrus Bowl like they stole something, like beat them ugly. I go on, I get drafted in the NFL. Never really got a shot to play there, get cut from the CFL, go to the Arena League. I get cut a couple times in the Arena League. Finally ended up with the Albany Firebirds. and we go on to win a world championship, and I become the highest rated passer in the history of the Arena Football League. Wow. So in spite of every kind of hurdle or obstacle that was thrown in my way, I found a way to succeed and to overcome it. And then a lot of it is due to those big T traumas from when I was a kid, right? It's amazing how it works within our nervous system. And I know we'll talk about a lot of that coming out, but I learned how to optimize performance, how to focus down to the process, take one step at a time, do all those things that help you to have success no matter what you do. And that's the title of my book is Everyday Great. And the subtitle is The Playbook for Winning at Everything. Mm-hmm. And that's what I learned by growing up and overcoming cystic fibrosis.
It's incredible. Such an inspiring story. And there's a reason why you're an author, a broadcaster, and a keynote speaker. So I love it. Thank you so much for highlighting all of that. And so to go back, like when you were 6 years old, that's when you started to get into sports, correct?
Yeah. My parents had, we played around, we'd done, the little things, the gymnastics, those kind of things. Right. But when it became a purpose-driven approach is when I was 6. The doctor said, this will help. My parents said, we are doing it. Like they locked in, they're like, we are doing this full go. And so my brother was playing soccer at the time. And my parents were like, nope, go out there and run with the team. And I wasn't old enough at that time. You had to be 8. So I'm literally running with my brother's soccer team. I'm doing those kind of things where they're putting me into swimming stuff that had a lot of conditioning aspects to it. They had me in basketball to pick up basketball back then. So everything they could put me in, they put me into.
So that was when you talked about earlier that your lungs felt like they were on fire, they're burning. Yeah. So I'm curious, like, especially back then, because even now, like, breath work and nervous system, all that, like there's a lot of talk around it. Right. But like back then, like what did you do physically to overcome those sensations?
So there's a couple things that actually I still have some of them today from time to time that I do that you didn't know. When I would run sprints, it would hurt and it would burn so bad. And, that's a kid, that's scary. Your lungs are literally burning. For those who don't know, cystic fibrosis means that you create extra mucus. You end up with all this fluid, and that fluid is hard to clear. And so as a result, your lungs get really sticky. They're not as elastic, and you have these blockages in your lungs. You can't process as much oxygen. And so that's what was going on with me is I was trying to process oxygen and I couldn't do it at that rate. And I would cough and I would hack and I would do all those things. But I would make a deal with myself. I would run a sprint and it would burn and I'd bend over and, coaches would be like, stand up. Because back then they thought that was the best way to get air, which is completely wrong, by the way. And so I would stand up and I would put my hands behind my head and try to stretch my lungs. And I would say, I'm going to run the next one. I'm just going to run the next one. I would make a deal with myself and I didn't know it then, right? I didn't understand it then. Since then, I've done the studies for my book, but the human brain hates uncertainty. And so when it doesn't know how many are left, right? How many sprints are left or how long it's going to be or what it's going to take, it starts to spin these fears, right? And this is the negativity bias that we all have, that little voice in your head telling you, I can't make this. I don't have this. It's not in me. Like those things. And that's when your brain starts to say it. And I would make the deal that I'm just going to run the next one. That's it. I would put my mind to that because anybody can do one of anything. And so I would line up and I would run and I would sprint full speed and I would win it oftentimes because I decided I'm going to do it. I would get to the far end. I would bend over. It would hurt. And I would look over the sideline and my mom would be standing there and she'd have that mama bear face on where she's like, my little boy, I'm worried about him. She was that kind of mom. She's great. I still literally send her a video every morning. She's incredible. And my dad, though, who was also incredible, was voted Citizen of the Year twice in our hometown when I grew up, was former 82nd Airborne, right? He was a paratrooper. And so he was tougher than hell. And he would look at me and he'd go, look, if you get a nick, you get a bruise, you get a scratch. If it hurts, if your lungs burn, you just rub a little dirt on it and you get back in the game. And that's what you do. And so that's what I did. And I'd stand up after that next one and I'd go, okay, and now I'm just going to run the next one. Mm-hmm. The next one. And so I literally didn't know it then, but I was developing this one at a time process. It was what we are now calling being present, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not thinking about anything else, but I'm thinking about this moment and being there. And I started developing that at 6 years old, which was amazing. And then in terms of breath work, I would literally wake up in the mornings. My parents would tell me I would moan in the mornings, but I would take a deep breath as I'm starting to wake up, and I would hold it for as long as possible, not knowing. And I would just go, and I would do that for as long as it took to let that breath out. Well, now I know that that's doing two things. A, it's stretching my lungs, right? It's making me feel like my lungs are at capacity. But B, it's also inhibiting my amygdala. So that fear is coming down. So my stress response isn't quite as active. So I can wake up in a good place, right? That's why breath work works. And so I kind of developed these things, and I intuitively understood that they were helping me, even if I didn't understand the science as to why they were helping me. And it's why it became super important for me and so intentional later in my life to find all those things that can increase performance and optimize behaviors and all of that stuff that can help me. And it became a huge part of my life as an athlete to be constantly improving.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever felt overwhelmed by emotions and unsure how to move through them? Sam created the Breath Club to help you find calm and clarity. In this free online community, Sam teaches how to regulate your nervous system through breathwork and process emotions effectively. Did you know that most emotions only last 90 seconds when you fully allow yourself to feel them? This is called the 90-second rule, and it's a powerful tool backed by science for emotional healing. Each week, Sam hosts live calls to guide breathwork practices and create real connection. You'll also get access to an online course and pre-recorded breathwork videos. The link to join is in the show notes.
I love all of this so much, and there's so many different threads I can pull at, one of which is intuition. And you mentioned that. And I think a lot of times, especially me being a breathwork practitioner, a teacher, so often people just want to know the science, and I teach a ton of science and all that. And I know you're into that as well.
Totally.
But at the same time, I'm telling myself, I'm telling others, sometimes that can be a blocker because we get so in our head of the way it should be. Or for example, if we're doing a breathwork practice, like say brain heart coherence, something like that, inhaling for 5.5 seconds, exhaling for 5.5 seconds. It's hard enough to count to 5.5 seconds,
Yeah.
And literally, if you guys haven't tried counting to 5.5 seconds and breathing to 5.5 seconds, it's challenging. If you just do 5 seconds, it's a lot easier. But point being, when I'm counting my breaths, whether it's box breathing or anything else, it takes me out of the experience and it puts me in my analytical mind. So for me personally, I actually prefer to go intuitively, just exactly how you described as a little kid, just being taking that big breath in, holding at the top, and then the slow sigh, let it all out, and not worrying about the seconds. Another thing I think would be a really good topic for us to talk about is these days there's so much talk about, we could call it toxic masculinity, toxic drive, or whatever it is. For me, I know the 75 hard challenge is a huge turnoff. Because personally, how I got into doing the work and mental and emotional health was being so driven and achieving, I always say my version of the Super Bowl. My sights were being named to Silicon Valley's 40 under 40 list and building a 7-figure business. I did all that. Then I felt more depressed afterwards. And I was like, okay, something's off here. So my question is, that served you so much in your youth to build that mindset of your father specifically, I forget how, lick your
rub some dirt on it.
Yeah. I the old shirt, what is it? Pain is weakness leaving the body,
Right. Steven Seagal. Yeah.
Yeah, the sayings like that, which there is truth to a lot of this stuff, and it can build resilience. But where do you find that middle ground to also bring in mindfulness and emotional health?
So I love a ton of what you just said. I'm there with you on all of it. Today, the big culture is the grind culture, right? And they glorify the grind, and it doesn't take into account the actuality of the human nervous system. It just really doesn't. And so it's become performative more than anything, as far as I'm concerned. These guys are doing it to say, "Oh, I'm grinding. Oh, I'm grinding." rest and recovery are part of improvement. You can't adapt. See, the premise in my book is that you are always training. The human organism is the most adaptive organism on this planet. We have literally built cities at 3 miles high where we can live, function, and work in Peru. We have built structures under the ocean where we can live underwater. We live in the deserts. We live in the Arctic tundra. We can adapt to any stress that this planet can throw at us because this is where we came to be. This is where we have lived. This is where we've coexisted forever. The whole grind thing takes you so far. It goes two directions. One, there's the grind culture. One, there's people who only seek comfort. The middle ground is where we thrive. We have to give our bodies room to adapt. We have to give our bodies room to recover. If you don't do that, you can't adapt. And that's when you start seeing the maladaptive responses, right? I did this. I went through it. I talked about the trauma, and I'll kind of jump into that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
In that when I was little, that little infant, we've nicknamed him the Desperado now, by the way. Who knew the Eagles were trauma-informed rock and roll? But he, and we'll talk about that too if you want to. But he was so.
Well, real quick, are we talking like IFS, like at parts work when you?
Yes. Well, so yeah, it is IFS in its entirety. I do it through the EMDR process.
Okay,
and
cool.
So that internal family system, right? The Desperado, the little one, it's the actual little one who was there, but understanding what he was going through, right? And so he feels so desperate to be healthy, to be connected, to be all those things, that when he gets to that point, when he feels that much stress, the grind for so long that there's no escaping it, that he has no control, all of a sudden, he's the setting in my nervous system. And people, when they talk about PTSD, I hate using that term. I feel like it's stolen valor because it started with the military guys, right? And I know that it's not, and I understand that it's real for everybody. But I tend to refer to it as PTI. It's a post-trauma impression that was made on your nervous system. It's a setting that was locked into your nervous system. And so when you get to a point that triggers that setting, it goes back to the behavior that helped you survive that moment. And for a lot of us, when we lose control, Seligman, who, way back when came up with the learned helplessness theory, actually reset it in 2017 and realized that freeze is actually our first human response. And that we have to learn that we have control in order to overcome the freeze response. Well, that setting oftentimes when we are helpless, when we're little and we have that trauma, is to go right to freeze. And the freeze is then what these modern healthcare professionals are calling depression and anxiety. Really, if you want to go deep into it, it's dorsal vagal shutdown. It's polyvagal theory, and it's about our vagus nerve, and it's cutting us off. It's the way that animals, when they get attacked, in order to bleed less, to breathe less, to struggle less, and to not feel the pain of being munched by a lion or a coyote, shut down so that they don't have to experience it. And it's once you've lost all control that your body does this to protect you. We call it depression now. We label it that. It's in the DSM-5, all that stuff. But the labels really hurt what we're trying to do. PTSD, or what I call PTI, is really that setting that you have to get back to, that you have to be able to reprocess. And that's the internal family system, right? It's the Desperado who's so, for me, Desperado, because we used the Eagles song in an EMDR session, and it just opened everything up for me. But it really is trauma-informed rock and roll if you read the lyrics. And then there's the gladiator in me who became the football player, right? The gladiator was ready to go to battle. He was always ready to fight, right? So this is the internal family system kind of playing out in my head. And it's taking the fear away from the Desperado, the little one. It's taking the shame away from the gladiator, right? Because that shame is what makes him fight harder, which then puts you back into that spiral, which makes you grind, which then re-triggers that trauma. And so it's this whole cycling of things that puts you back into this place where you feel like you are helpless, like you're hopeless. And if you understand these concepts, and quite honestly, with EMDR, and I know that you talk about plant medicine all the time with a lot of that, you don't even need to understand it. Your nervous system will take you through this process if you allow it with a good guide or with somebody there who can help you, because our nervous system wants to heal at all times. And that's the beauty of it. We all have our own mental messes that we get into. We all have our things that we hang up on, but it wants to heal. And if you understand the concepts of it, it really makes it more, you have a stronger ability to be able to get through those things. But I kind of talked around in circles there, but the grind culture, not a big fan of it, because it doesn't give you time to heal. It doesn't give you time to recover. And it glorifies the things that literally tax our nervous system to the point where we feel helpless.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing all of that. And it makes sense how the little boy in you, Desperado, developed into a gladiator. I can think of another professional athlete friend, a soccer player, who kind of had a similar type thing. And I think that's common for so many of us. And I don't know why right now I'm hearing a Boy Named Sue by Johnny Cash.
Yeah,
maybe
right. Yeah.
Because it went into my subconscious with trauma-informed rock and roll, which I love that so much. But yeah, like A Boy Named Sue, like for me, my name is Samuel, my birth name. I used to say in college when girls would ask, like, is your real name Samuel? I'd be, no, it's Samson, it just, right. But yeah, I grew up as a Sammy, and I had so much shame with Sammy. And I remember switching high schools when I was a junior or something, and I switched my name to Sam. And then I came back to my original high school, and I came back as Sam. And still to this day, I mean, that's back when I was 16 years old. I still have like family members, like aunts and uncles, or it slips with my parents sometimes, where they say Sammy, and all of a sudden I just feel myself kind of like be small, and I think I could have used a little bit more of that Johnny Cash energy of being like Sue, like A Boy Named Sue. Like for me, that's what Sammy had always felt like. So when I do parts work, there's a lot of like reclaiming what I've shunned away, that part of myself that I feels like, feminine or a little boy, or just, that piece of me that I've isolated, in terms of IFS work.
100%. And allowing that and understanding it, right? The gladiator in me was just shame that I felt fear, that I had that kind of exposure, that I was vulnerable. There was no vulnerability allowed, right? That's not okay. Whereas if you think back to, here's an infant, he's days old. He knows nothing. We were born, the only sensation we have is anxiety, like to try to make, we got to pee. We're anxious, right? We're hungry. We get anxious. We cry. So that's all we have. And then he's literally tormented with illness and hunger and can't sleep and all the badness that happens. And so to go back and to understand that really takes a lot of that shame away. And the shame is kind of the glue that binds all of those pieces together that creates that repeating cycle. And if you can take the shame out, you remove that glue, and now you can disassemble it and reprocess it in a way that's healthy and healing, so that you can own that. I own, now when I see Desperado, at first I saw this crying baby, red and the whole 9 yards. Now I see him in this felt cowboy hat, and I understand him better, and he's not crying. So it's to be able to process it to a point where you can understand it. And now that trigger isn't as powerful as it once was. And that's where you're trying to get to, right? And I had the huge benefit of being able to work with Dr. Cio Hernandez. You talked about her in the open. She is a genius. She was one of the early adapters of EMDR therapy. She's been doing it for 20 some years now, right? Since it came on the scene. She is now one of 10 people in America who can do what she does. And she trains the trainers in EMDR therapy and neurofeedback. And she is a specialist, and she is just incredibly powerful, not just in EMDR, but PTSD, trauma therapy, all these things. She's just amazing at what she does. And so I have that benefit. She's my co-author on the next book.
That's incredible. When are you expecting that book to come out?
It's a while. So she has an app right now called the Got This app, which is incredibly powerful around EMDR that we're working on the process of the build out and kind of getting that out into the world to help as many people as possible. My journey has, I told you about the adoption, has now gone into the adoption realm as well. I'm starting to work with companies that deal with and work with adopted families, foster families, to go there as well on top of the corporate stuff and the sports stuff that I already do.
Yeah, I'm curious just a moment to dive into some of your work and specifically like sports, things like that. Obviously, with your book, you have praise from Jared Goff, and I know a lot of my listeners aren't necessarily sports fanatics. I was calling myself a recovering bro for a while, and I stopped watching sports after I did ayahuasca, and I'm just starting to watch Warriors games again. I haven't gotten back into football, but I used to be a diehard Niners fan, and I
Yeah.
remember, the Hard Knocks with Jared Goff whenever he was drafted number one overall pick in the NFL, and he didn't know which way sunset was or something like
Yes.
that.
Where the sunset. Yes.
Yeah, it was a big joke. But anyways, Jared Goff, did he win a Super Bowl with the Rams, right? Or no, that was
He
Matthew
went.
Stafford.
Right. He went with the Rams the year before. Stafford won it the next year.
That's right.
And then last year, he took Detroit deeper into the playoffs than they've been in forever. And so it's a reclamation story for him in Detroit. He's a really good friend. Obviously, he was a quarterback at Cal. I've known him since he was 17 years old. And
Wow.
I absolutely love him. I worked with him when he was there. We talked football, we talked mindset, we did all that stuff when he was in college. And his dad's a good friend. Just love the family. And I know not a ton of sports fans, but if there's somebody that you want to follow as an athlete, it's Jared Goff. He's as good
Okay,
a person
cool.
now as he was when he came out. He's just a high quality human being.
You have a podcast, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
I have like 4 of them now. I didn't mean to,
Yeah.
but I do one around Cal football, which is called The Ultimate Insider, and it's on Bear Insider. And then I do one that's around my book. It's called Everyday Great, and
But
it's on
do you have an
mindset.
interview with Jared Goff?
Yeah, I have one. I actually have one coming up here, but I have Alex Mack, who
Cool.
just came out.
Right.
He just got voted into the College Football Hall of Fame. Craig Morton, who's 17-year, 3-time AFL MVP. Like, I have a bunch of former pros on there. And then we talk, like people like you, talk about mindset, talk about kind of developing our inner strength rather than just the football stuff as well. So it kind of crosses all those boundaries. We talk about how the athletes work their mindset in terms of what they do.
Yeah, for those of you that aren't into sports, just hang on. We're going to get back to all the other stuff because I'm kind of feeling called to geek out on a little sports stuff here for a
Yeah.
minute. But you had Scott, is it Fujita, right?
Fujita, yeah.
He was a linebacker for the Saints, right?
He was a linebacker for the Saints, linebacker
Yeah.
for the Browns, also a Cal guy, one of the most thoughtful human beings on this planet, an incredible dude. And
Yeah,
that was a good podcast if you got to listen to it.
I'm
I had somebody
going to
come.
listen to it afterward. I should have listened to it before, but I recognize him because I remember, I think he used to live in Monterey. I remember seeing him around town a couple times, or maybe
Yeah,
it was Carmel.
Carmel. Yeah, he's a Carmel guy. And he used to be, they call it the head of school. I forget the name of the school right now, something day school down there. But he had never done it before, and he took over as the head of school down there, which is essentially like the principal or superintendent of the school.
Oh,
right?
wow.
And just did a fantastic job, phenomenal job, just because of who he is. But I've also known him since he was 17 years old coming to Cal.
That's cool.
And he's just always been an incredibly thoughtful guy. I used to host a fly fishing show. He came on my fly fishing show. So it's, I've had the opportunity being a Cal guy to meet some athletes who are more than just athletes. The beauty of Cal and Stanford, even though there's a rivalry, is
Right.
that you get some dudes who are next level guys, and you see them all the time playing football, but phenomenal human beings as well.
So,
And I've
Mike,
had the opportunity to meet a bunch of those.
you'll appreciate this. Back in 2011, I graduated from Chico State, and I started my first business that ended up being the 7-figure business. It was a promotional products brand and merchandise company, and I started with sandals called Chico feet that left an impression in the sand of the words Chico because I went to Chico State, and everyone called the bottom of their feet because they're dirty from partying and whatever else Chico feet. So I literally made sandals called Chico feet that left an impression in the sand of the words Chico feet. And there's an interview they did with me, like the Action News, right after I walked the stage. And I was hungover walking the stage up all night. And I remember I had my sandals with me. My parents were probably so embarrassed. And when they announced my name, like I put up my sandals like, yeah, So then after that, like hungover, I did this news segment and I watched it recently. I mean, it's 14 years old at this point. And it's so funny to look back and be like, man, it's such bro energy. But I remember them
Right.
interviewing me in the segment, and I go, everything great comes out of Chico. Sierra Nevada, clean canteen, Chico bag, Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
And for people that don't know, Aaron Rodgers, he actually played at Cal, and he's from Chico. And it's incredible because now he's into the plant medicine work. All right. So having said all of that, the reason why I wanted to bring this up in my initial question with Jared Goff and whatever else is like, football players specifically. I mean, there's football players and like UFC and fighters, like that's some of the more macho sports, you know, and a lot of what we're talking about is being connected with our feelings more than anything. And for men, like that's being vulnerable, and we're not like supposed to be vulnerable. So I'm curious how your message is being received and what sorts of changes you're seeing amongst men specifically that typically would be like, no, I'm not going there.
Well, so it's a great question, by the way, in that I write in the second to last chapter of my book about the connection and vulnerability, and how kind of the nature of football forever was, no way am I ever being vulnerable. Like, I'm not showing that. I'm not supposed to be. There's nothing that you do. You know, you're constantly trying to improve to get better, and that I'm never going there. I'm not going to be vulnerable. But the truth is that we as human beings are literally biologically designed to interact with one another. We are designed to be social, and we are at our best when we are connected to one another. We find safety in connection with other human beings. And so the connection, you cannot be vulnerable to people outside of your team in the game, because you're literally, you know, going for 60 minutes of, you know, fighting each other. But you can be vulnerable with people inside the huddle, and with people inside your locker room, and people inside your team and organization. And so the way I teach it is to find that connection with one another, to open up, to be vulnerable. I actually led last year, Fernando Mendoza was the quarterback at Cal, and working with me on the mental skills game, he put together a camping trip for the entire offense. And at the entire offense, they started by discussing one of those things about yourself that you would never naturally let out, that you would talk about something that made you vulnerable amongst your team. And literally the whole offense got into it and kind of exposed themselves to one another and came together as an offense as a result. And when you're on really great teams, that's what they're like. People have this vision from outside the locker room of these. My wife says it all the time. She's like, I would have never married a football player. Right. But once you understand how true team culture works, real team culture, there is an incredibly powerful bond and a vulnerability there that you open yourself up. I played with guys who may have, you know, cheated on their wives, or may have done things outside of that would never, ever do that to me. I knew that in the locker room because we had formed that bond, because they had kind of put themselves out there. There were guys that outside the locker room may have done things for themselves, but inside the locker room, they were Class A team players. And so that's how you develop it. And you develop it with that vulnerability, with the understanding that connection makes you stronger, with the understanding that a team can be better than the sum of their parts. And so first you have to connect to yourself to be okay with where you stand, right? And then you can put that energy out there by being vulnerable with your teammates. And once you do that, you find that people do that back. It's just biological. We have a need to do that.
If you're looking for a powerful and transformative experience for your next event, consider bringing in Sam Kabert as a keynote speaker. Sam's message of soul life balance and his expertise in mental health and mindfulness resonate deeply with audiences. He not only inspires with his story, but also offers practical tools like breathwork to help attendees regulate their emotions and reconnect with themselves. You can even have Sam lead a guided breathwork journey, creating a truly unforgettable experience. To learn more or book Sam for your event, check out the link in the show notes to book a call with Sam now.
So this may be speculation, but when you talk about like playing with a player who may have cheated on his wife, but he would never do anything like that to you because of the bond that you've created, this may be speculating, but do you think, not calling this specific player out, but situations or like say cheating on a partner could happen because there's a lack of actually being seen in the relationship, i.e. vulnerability.
I think there's a million reasons it happens in relationships, for sure. There's obviously a disconnect. I think you're not as connected there as you would. And you have a sense of that. I had a discussion with one of my teammates, and he was asking me, because on the road, I wouldn't do those things, right? I would go out and drink, and I had a good time, and I partied, and I did all that. I just never took anybody else home. I was married. And so I had made a commitment. I was staying in that commitment, period. And they were like, how do you do that when you're on the road? Because it's so easy. And it is. As an athlete, it's super easy. They're like, how do you do that? And I just said, well, for me, I would just picture, my wife back home doing the same thing that I would have been doing. And I just go, oh, that's enough for me. And my teammate who had just done that the night before, he's like, oh, stop it. Oh, it's awful. But if he's willing to do that, and I told him, I go, if you're willing to do that, then your partner, your girlfriend, your wife is probably willing to do that too, because she's feeling the same thing. Right? You're both disconnected. And it turned out 3 weeks later, he found out that was happening.
Yeah.
And so we know, right? We talk about the intuitiveness. We know intuitively, it's there. And if you're doubting, somebody else is doubting too. Now we're getting into more relationship stuff, but that's really when you create that vulnerability, when you open yourself up in a relationship, at least you understand emotionally, you have that connection that you understand where each other are coming from. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's okay, right? There's no shame or blame in that. But once you've committed, once you become vulnerable, once you've fully kind of gotten in, you're in a really powerful place.
Yeah, 100%. I think anyone listening or anyone that's had that experience, when you just let your guard down. I had an experience where I was doing a 7-day fast in December of last year, 2024. And my neighbor had lost his son, a football player. I think he was homecoming king or something, early 20s, in a car accident, probably 6 months before. And I see my neighbor almost every day, the beach walks, whatever. And I remember I've held a lot of space for him. That's what I do. I'm a space holder. But I allowed him to hold space for me. And I remember just breaking down in tears, and then he did too. And we had this really good hug, whatever else. And, didn't expect that. And I'm the type of guy, I'm usually one slow tear comes down my cheek, no matter how much I'm doing this work and helping guide others. It's still just something I'm working through. And everything shifted for me after that, being able to be seen in my vulnerability and have another man as well to hold that space for me. So it's so incredible. And I guess what I'm getting at here is as you're working with all these players, how long have you been working with players then? 20, 30 years or so?
Yeah. I mean, I've been coaching since I got done playing. So coaching on and off in terms of athleticism, but then I've also been working on mindset stuff for the last decade, where I'm working with players to kind of help them develop the right mindsets for playing.
Yeah, and I think there's a college player right now that's known for college quarterback known for meditating for before games, right?
There was a bunch. PJ McCarthy was a big one last year. It kind of went out. The kid from Michigan. I was just talking about him yesterday. So he's a guy that does, but a bunch of them are doing it now, right? The breath work, the meditation, all of that stuff has found its way in. The guys that I work with, they start meditating, or at least visualizing with meditation, with built into that visualization, right? Because meditation is really about breath work and bringing your focus back without judgment. So that's what we're trying to do. And so I can have you run through plays the same way you would do a body scan. And I can have you doing breath work while you're doing that. So you've got the two things that you're focused on. And then when we lose focus, we bring it back every time. And then we learn how to focus within our meditation.
So it's clearly becoming way more acceptable and less stigma. I mean, when I was in college, I had a guy in my fraternity who mentioned meditating. And I remember thinking about the Ninja Turtle movies from the 90s and being meditating, that's not real, and look at me now, right? But it just 15, 17 years ago or something, just being meditate, what are you talking about? And me not even being... all I was top frat above the most popular bar in town and repped Monster Energy drinks, not a football player or athlete or jock or anything like that. Point being though, it's clearly become less like stigmatized in terms of everything we're talking about. But what sort of resistance do you get met with? Where do people draw the line? Like, for example, with me, one of my messages is soul life balance rather than work life balance. And I speak to a lot of corporate as well. And sometimes that doesn't land so well because of the word soul, which is ridiculous, but it is what it is. So what kind of resistant marks does anything you talk about get met with?
With athletes, the beauty of it is, I mean, I'm incredibly grateful to be able to work with athletes because they are literally looking to get better. So whatever they're hungry for, whatever you want to give them. And so the resistance comes in where their nervous system setting has gotten hung up, really. And so where their trauma has put them into a place. And that's the thing. These guys all have the same type of traumas that we have in their past. It could be little t, it could be big T, but they've got something that they're hung up on that's not getting over them. Obviously, it's a performance anxiety thing for most of these guys to be able to be focused in the minute and to understand that biologically speaking, that's helping you to get better, right? Stress is enhancing. And so the resistance comes in recognizing that it's okay to feel like that. It's all right. It doesn't make you weaker, right? So that's their gladiators telling them it's shameful for them to feel that way and to work them through that, to help them see that that's okay. And this grind culture that tells you that you have to be 100% exceptional every single day. You have to be better than you ever were in the history of your athletic career. It's bullshit. You want to be better than your average by the smallest of margin every single day. If you've done that, then you've improved. And if you stack a bunch of those on top of each other, by the end of your career, you realize that you've done something amazing. But it's literally impossible to go from, I was great today, I need to be exceptionally great tomorrow. And you just can't do that. The human nervous system doesn't adapt that fast. We don't grow that fast. We don't have that ability to have that kind of growth within us. So we set reasonable expectations. We find, I use the things I say that my work happens where our biology and our psychology intersects. And so I use biological processes that help harness our psychology to tell ourselves the proper stories so that we can then exceed in the moment. And so we're optimizing obviously for game day, but we have to optimize for every practice too. You want to be in peak performance for games. You want to be in optimal performance for practices. And so we're finding a way to cycle that so that guys can tell themselves the right stories. They can put together a highlight reel so they can get themselves in the right mind frame. All these things that help you to perform and show up on game day with your team.
Oh, I love all this so much. This conversation's like filling my cup. This is so much fun. I love it. So you mentioned, or actually, I'll get to that. If something's coming up for one of the people, just regardless of gender, someone you're working with in any sort of capacity. No, let's bring it back to athletes and men specifically. Change my mind there. If something's coming up where maybe it's a resurfacing of a memory that was suppressed, repressed, and it's something like big T, or even if it's small t, but it's something's coming up, how do you support them then?
So initially, without any judgment whatsoever, right? Because that's the place that they're at. When it's coming up like that, it's the shame that you're seeing expose itself out there. That's the fear that you're seeing, the shame of being vulnerable for the athletes, right? They don't like that. And so there's zero judgment to them. I help them to recognize that. And we talk through it and try to reprocess it. I think talk therapy is not nearly as effective as stuff like EMDR, bilateral stimulation, those kind of things. And so we find a way to get into a place where we can create a bilateral stimulation. We find a way that we can create movement or tapping or some kind of other pattern where we get into a stimulated state where we can kind of inhibit the amygdala, so our stress response isn't firing off, where we can approach that. If it's really bad, and I've had a couple, but I have the silver bullet in the fact that Dr. C.O. Hernandez works with me all the time. And so if it really needs something to the next level, I give it to true professionals in that space, right? Because crossing over those two is more difficult. You need to take them out of that, the stress and the expectations of sports to be able to deal with the really important stuff.
100%.
Because sports is important, but our nervous system and the way that we handle that is even more so important. And so that comes first, and then we can reprocess back in. And it's amazing. The growth, the post-traumatic growth that happens after that for athletes is off the charts. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, because we're releasing all that we didn't know we were hanging on to,
Think about the energy it takes to maintain that, right? Just to maintain the barrier to keep that from surfacing. And once you can now use that energy store back into the flow of what you want to do as an athlete, it's incredibly powerful.
All right. So last little small topic here. You mentioned a few times like how stress can be an enhancer. Speak with us a little bit about that.
So Dr. Ali Crum from Stanford, I have in my book, I met Dr. Bill Koich, and a quick story. I had that little voice in my head telling me, you're not good enough, you're not enough, you're not fast enough, you're not strong enough. All this before games, and I would start to get that stress response, and I'd feel the butterflies and the sweaty palms and the ears ringing and all that stuff. And it would freak me out, and I would start yawning. And so we met with a sports psychologist as quarterbacks, and we went through the session. At the end of the session, he's like, so you guys got any questions for me? He's this guy from Brooklyn, New York. He was awesome. Yeah. And I go, yeah, I yawn before games and it freaks me out. How do I change that? He's like, oh yeah, that's your stress response. I'm like, my stress response? He goes, yeah, it's fight or flight. It's you see a bear, you see a T-Rex, and he wants to get, you either get ready to run or to fight. And long story short, I'm like, so I'm supposed to feel like that? He's like, yeah, it makes you better, to do what you do, to play football, to run or fight. And I was like, oh my God. So all those feelings that I've been trying to deny and be pissed about are making me better at what I'm about to do. Well, Dr. Ali Crum from Stanford, 2016, comes out with her stress is enhancing mindset. If you believe stress is stressful, your biomarkers decrease, your blood pressure increases, and your performance decreases. If you believe that stress is enhancing, which is what Bill gave me with that comment, your blood pressure decreases, your biomarkers increase, and your performance increases. Mm-hmm. And so for athletes, when you feel that, that's your stress response getting you ready to do what you're about to do. It's enhancing you for what you're about to start doing.
Love it. Love it. And great impression. You've definitely told that story before.
I have. It's part of my speech when I go out and talk to corporations, because it's a huge perception. It's a huge mind shift for people, right? And the shift is what you need to have.
Yeah, I love the reframe. I'm so glad I asked that so we could get that in there, because that is so massive. Mike, I could talk to you all day. I could do so many more podcasts with you. This has been such a blast. I appreciate you coming on the show. Everyone, check out the show notes. You can find Mike's website there, the link to his book, Everyday Great, and also listen to his podcast. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us here on Soul Seeker Show.
I appreciate you having me on, brother. I appreciate you trusting me enough to trust me with your audience. It's a great time. I love what you're doing. I think it's awesome. And I think, kind of where we cross over is a pretty powerful place for human beings. So appreciate you having me on. I look forward to having you on my Everyday Great podcast, and we can kind of continue this conversation the other direction.
Awesome. I'd love to be honored to be a guest on your show. Thank you so much, Mike, and we'll talk more. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate if you could just take a few moments to leave the podcast a 5-star review. Leaving a 5-star review helps other people discover the podcast so that the pod can grow. And if you are down with the mission of this podcast to raise the collective consciousness from its fallen state, then why not give back to the show? It's easy, it's free, it's quick, it's simple. All you gotta do is leave the show a 5-star review. And if you want to go deeper with me, know that the best way to do so is by joining my Breath Club community, where I lead you through breath work every single week. And there's a bank of pre-recorded breath work exercises that you can do on your own. I, of course, am a keynote speaker myself and a coach as well. So if you're interested in working together in that capacity, please feel free to reach out. Other than that, all the links to connect with Mike are in the show notes. And I will see you on the next episode of the Soul Seeker podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the very end. I hope you dug this podcast just as much as I enjoyed it. If you got anything at all, please, if you could just do me a favor and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast. It helps the show grow. So thank you for considering to leave a review. If you want to go deeper with Soltara or Elan, you can find the links to connect with them in the show notes. And if you want to work with me, the best way to work with me, the easiest way to work with me is the free way. And that's by joining the Breath Club. The link to the Breath Club is in the show notes. And also know that I'm available for one-on-one support, that is coaching and guidance, as well as keynotes and breathwork journeys for conferences and events. Thank you so much, and I will see you on the next episode of The Soul Seeker.